How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Elia Gonzalez here. And today let's going to now create this particularly website, especially to now understand what are the things that we need to put in place in order to construct and create now a basic layout from scratch. And you may wonder why this is important. Well, because first, we're going to now revisit is all of this concept. We're going to apply this concept, and at the end of the day, build a UI in any time that we need to do that in the long run. So, for example, if you, let's say somebody had told you to now implement this particular design as a UI developer and so on and so forth, so you know how to do that. Particularly, you know how these things works. All of these tools that we have in CSS, and that is to make a quick recap of all of this is first understand the fundamentals, the CSS declaration, the CSS rules, what it is, and also the common stuff that despite that we have all of this JavaScript and CSS frameworks out there and tooling change that do a lot of the work for us, it is important to know what are the things that are still relevant in today's video 2025 October. And that is, well, understand what is the media queries, why media queries, what is media queries, what is the what where those media query fits in the anatomy of Java of CSS, and also is the common selectors that we're gonna use. For example, pseudo selectors like hover and focus. Why we care about focus, especially for accessibility content, which is makes the content accessible for all for a wide audience, and that is, well, following is this particular guidelines, which is the W or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is, hey, this content must be perceivable, it must be operable, it must be understandable, and it must also be robust, right? So the features that you are implementing here must be future proof. And also some others layouts, such as or some other pseudo classes like child element last, or the end element last, or the nth element first, or the last end type or the last end child. All right. So an understanding is the type of units. So the pixels, the root elements, the end, and why we care about each one of them, as well as the percentage. Why in which scenario where we use now percentage, which is something that I'm gonna describe that in today's video. And also is the color. So what is the color formats that we have in CSS, whether it is the keyword or the the hexadecimal or RGB or HSL, right? And why we prefer, I didn't recognize the value of HSL until I did, which is now have a more intuition when it comes to get or derive color from one to another. Useful, especially, for example, when you need to calculate is the shadow of a particular element, right? Again, something that we're gonna see that in this video. And also is, well, the 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 another components that we need to know, which is the typography. What is a font family? What a font family represent? What are the type of fonts that we can have? Sans, in sans serif, what actually means, and why in this font family, since this is a character set that has different weight, font weight, and variants, whether it's a strong or italic, what actually means strong, what represents, okay, and also the italic, what also represents. Hey, you want to now describe is anything that is part of a quote. So you're quoting something, or you are now referencing some academia or some science phrase, or TV series and television shows, also foreign words, and this is again is again, as we develop our website here, we're going to apply all of this together. So, and also understand that why do we have now web fonts in order to customize the user experience, so to provide now um, a unique user experience to their users. So, for example, now fonts like cerulean, I think it is, or cerulean. Cerulean is a color, cerulean, which is a font from Airbnb. To anytime that you see this font, you know automatically, oh, this is Airbnb, right? But this is also why we use web fonts, and where do we use this web font. Here we're not using it, and I would like to add that too, you know. But in any case, so here we are, okay. And also is now understanding is what you can do with these fonts. So, for example, the operations, so text alignment, line height, or text spacing, and text transformations. So this is part of the anatomy of the CSS, at least in 2025. And then also is the things that we need to know, which are part of the fundamentals. And here we have is these two models. These two fundamentals model is based upon the rendering logic. So first we look at in the model one, the rendering logic is all about describing is that user agents actually now hold is their own style that describe how elements on the DOMs will look like as a box, and even CSS describe this. So this is something that I don't made that up. I'm not gonna broad. Let me do this. CSS visual formatting here. So the visual formatting model, okay, this is where it's describing here, okay, how user agents process the document tree, and user agents is the browsers, all right, how user agents process the document tree for visual media. And this visual media, or media in any ways, all right, and media is one of the most important feature of a style sheet. Again, the reason why we actually look at, or do we recap about the media, okay, because it specifies how a document is present on different medias, on the screen, on paper, and speech synthesizers. I wasn't aware of that until I read this, with a braille device, etc. So certain CSS properties are only designed for certain medias. Page break before, so for example, page media, and on occasion, however, style sheets from different media type may share a property but require different values for that property. So for example, the font size property is useful both for screen and print media. So, but in any case, okay, so for example, the font size property is useful for both screen and print media. So again, in any case, which is also we look at the media rules. In here you can also recognize is what is the type what is the media type that you're going to look. Most of the time we use a screen, but we can also use now print or projection. All right. But the TLDR of all of that is just to present here that, or show you here that this the way of how now the CSS at the end of the day actually work is by taking each one of those elements into the document, all right, and then transform that into a boxes, right? So this is the video formatting model, and transform that into 0 or more boxes according to the box model, right? So because user agents by default, they come up with some of these default values of how all of these different elements should look like. So the input, the select, the text area, the radio button, the checkboxes, anchors, so on and so forth, right? So CSS reset exists because we want to now start from a blank state across different user agents, aka browsers. So then we look at that this particularly CSS, how you can now inherit this value. Most of the times are based on text. Okay, you can inherit this value based on that. Sorry. And then also is the sorry. Yeah, and also is the idea of what this now CSS cascade means, right? In other words, it's now how the competed CSS rules are applied into the DOM. So because we have several different tiers, we have 4 tiers. The further you go down into this tier, the less likely are to be applied into the DOM. Again, this goes beyond the scope of today's video, but I think it's quite important at least to understand that is something that exists. Okay, and when it comes to understanding now our content, okay, and how this content is being shown, which is something that in previous video I dedicate a little bit of time to understand the flow of this content, aka how do we normally read the content in Western cultures from left to right and top to down, known as inline, which follow is the direction of the text, and as a block, which follow is these collections of elements here, right? So they're labeled in this way, but this is only exclusive for Western cultures. But what happened when you want to make your content accessible for other cultures? So for example, like the Middle East or on the Asia, right? The Han Basin, right? Recently, well, Trump administration has some, how do you call it, disagreements or trade wars between China and the US. So in any case, it's more like who hold the largest D under it is spelled. In any case, but the point of this is that because now the content, and if we want to show this content not only for Western cultures, but also for any human culture, it is important to know that there are other properties that allow us is to describe is this flow of content in a logical way. So because this content is shown using now is the box, aka each one of those elements into the document represent now a one or multiple box. So depend how do you align these boxes is how they going to be present and how they're going to be how they're going to be present based on its dimension as well as its position. All right, the position on the page. So this box model, which is made of the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, which is a topic that is very overshoot, or a lot of people actually miss that. I was one of them, where they say, hey, but this is the fundamentals, bro. We should know this, or I should know this. So, but in any case, the thing here is that because we have this kind of properties, because this is the way of how we describe its elements into the DOM as a box using the visual formatting model, all right, that describe is the anatomy of these boxes, which is the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. So on the padding is when you want to add now is gap between the content, all right, from top, bottom, right, and left. And we also look at the way of how we can describe this. I am quite familiar with this. And also some of the shorthands, as well as the border. And on the border, yeah, and on the border, we look at the ways of how can we now is describe is pretty much like when you do a winter walk, you carry a jacket, so the fluffy content that is inside of you, so the content is yourself. The fluffy stuff and material is your padding, all right. The border is the line which separates the material from the outside world, and then you have now the margin, which must be something around 2 meters, roughly speaking, at least. When you go out, right? So okay, that's so far so good. Now, what happened is, because on the padding, which is something that we saw, and on the border, we can also describe is what will be the corner borders. The description of this border is quite different on how do we actually go with padding and margin. So here we describe is this particularly first we need is to describe is the only property that border with need is which style. So for example here, if we say hey border width, or you can say only border, all right, border, the only property that it needs is the border style, which is hey let me put it here as a solid, and now it prints that, right? So that's pretty straightforward. This is the first thing that it needs to, and if you want to provide now more properties, well, first it requires is the border width, the border width, the border line, and the color. So you can say hey HSL, this will be now like 270, 50 and 50, right? And this will be like greenish. Exactly. This is one of the reasons why I really love about the HSL, because it is pretty much more intuitive in how you can actually get a particular color. If you want to get red, you say, hey, well, 0. I mean, it's 33. something like this, 360, right? 360, for example. I do is 300. No, is but is 333, something like this. No, but this representing is the full color and so on and so forth. But in any case, this is how you can now represent our colors here, right? In this way. So this is now how you can represent now color here. Again, the whole point of today's video is to actually now describe is this by creating as a website. So okay, good. Now, let's actually move on to what is relevant when it comes to understand the margin, which is another property here. So on the margin, it follows quite the same intuition as the padding, but also you can have here in margin is negative margins, something that we're gonna see in a moment. So because now we look at these boxes and the way how these boxes relate to each other, and at the end of the day, CSS can be thought of a collections of mini languages that now describe is the position and the geometry of a element based on the layout algorithm that live internally on the browser or the user agents and is determined by that. All right, these specifications doesn't describe is the implementation details. It just describe what it should do. Okay, and that's interesting. That's very, very, very interesting. Okay, so in order for us to now understand the default layout algorithm, so for example the flow layout, because we can also have different layouts. So we have now the flexbox, we have the grids, so on and so forth. So what do we really care in today's video is to describe the normal flow as well as be able to codify is a layout. All right, and that's what we're going to do here. Let's get into this. Right, let's get into this. So this particular layout, the flow layout, which describe is how these boxes relate to each other, and you have now here in this layout is two type of boxes. So you have now is the box, the block box, or the inline box, and each one of them has a particular behavior. So the block actually takes all the horizontal space. All right, so no matter what is this content. So for example, you say that's right, and if you add more content to this, all right, no matter how many content you apply to this, say hey Lorem Ipsum $S, which is a text that is being used across the entire industry, and you for some reason you decide to now shrink this content here, right? Look at this content now shrink as we resize the window, right? But if for some reason we say hey, let's make now this strong to be is a block, right? So hey, you just want to choose to act as a block. So as you can see here, and because now the way how this being is calculated, display as a block, all right? So if the content here, now, because here's an interesting thing, two things here. First is the block and the inline, right? So block, as you can see, is going to now take all the available space. You can resize the dimension of this content, all right? And you say, hey, now the width will be is 400 pixels, right? And the content goes away as it is, as well as the height. Right? You can say, hey, 200 pixels, right? So you can modify that. But if this is an element that is now a inline element, which is what it is by default, you can modify its width. Okay, it's actually telling you here, hey, this particular element is an inline element. It fell into this bucket. So you can do that. And another great thing of the inline element is that because it takes only the available space that it needs, it actually is now line break the content here. Because there are other elements like images. And let me see if I can add this, for example. Let me edit that. Add an attribute. No, edit HTML. So for example, if I say image here, and I don't pass any source right now, you know, and I don't, and the alt here is image 1, right? And then image 2, and then image 3, right? Right? So the browser is going to render each one of those elements next to each other, aka they're acting like now an inline element, as you can see here. I didn't help to align them. They by default in the normal flow align into this. All right. So the interesting thing here is that if we for some reason now each one of these elements, as you can see here, right, they are now separate by some sort of text. So they are now separate is by some sort of space. So if we want to make now all of those elements to be directly next to each other, all we have to do is to close them together. See how they change that? See how they change this behavior? And I do find that is quite revealing. Again, these behaviors for image videos only works in this way is for the normal flow. All right. So, okay, it makes a lot of sense. And another thing is that because these particular elements now they have the browser by default treat these elements as a text, so they add now some line height for some elements, and if you want to remove that highlight, you can just say, hey, let's gonna put it as 0, right? And now the content changed a little bit. It's more fit as it is, as you can see, than the other as expected. So this is part of the nuance of working with image, at least in the flow layer. And the other is the another bucket, which is the block inline. So with block inlines, right? So now we say, hey, this block inline elements, all right, this block inline block, all right. Now we can is modify its dimensions, all right. We can modify its dimension here, okay. But unfortunately, the content here won't line break. So this is one of the trade-off of this particular element. And the other, so once we know is the boxes. So once we know is the box, which is how CSS now describe is these element is in how the elements is gonna look like, how the dog elements is gonna look like in the browser as a box. All right, this is why it say, hey, everything in CSS is a box. All right, and because these boxes, the way how they behave is gonna matters based on the layout that you use defined by the display property, all right, which is now defined as the algorithm that is being gonna be the algorithm used behind the scenes. It turns out that this, in the case of the normal flow, you have now three type of blocks. So the block, the inline, and the inline. On the inline block, right? And how they behave. And another question is that how is the height and width calculated here? That's a very good question. So the TLDR is that by default, when you apply anything to that, the width is going to be calculated based on the pattern position, and the height based on its children's elements, right? So because the width, we also look at the property that allows to work with, for example, hey, max width or mean width, or width, and the value, the possible values like fit content, all right? So for example, in this case, I can say, hey, I do want is to now, because I can modify its dimension here, since this is an inline element, but I do want is to make I want to modify its dimension here, right? I do want to modify its dimension here, and the width will be now is fit content as it is. So now it say, okay, so the width will be based on whatever is the pattern, all right? And I'm going to make that, and I'm going to make the content fit to the width of my parent. You also have is now is mean content and max content, which both of them focus now is on the contents. So max content say, hey, take all the available space that the children elements or the content is taken. In other words, it's take all the available space as it is. But if you say, hey, no, I want to make is the mean content, which say, hey, take browser user agent, take a look at which one of those elements are what is the widest what is the greater elements, what is the greater child elements, and that will be the width in the case of mean width. And in our case, content will match that, right? So content will match that, as you can see. So here's because we're adding some padding for that. So that's why we have this particular content here. But this is a way of how you can now work with this particular content. And unlike now width, height is gonna look at by default is going to look at the height of the elements here, right? So if we for some reason say, hey, what will be the line of this? Let's say, hey, min content, say max content. Okay. So by default, the height is the smallest element. Is so the height is calculated by the smallest children height. So in this case, because the height looks down the tree in order to compute that. So if we say, for example, now with height and we say fit content, you say, hey, well, I'm gonna do what it is. I'm gonna fit the content. Max content hasn't changed dramatically or saying of the mean content. Because again, both of them are just focusing on the children elements, right? So you can actually automatically say, hey, well, I want to now pass is 100%. But the thing here is that this is a good segue, because what happened, for example, if you want to now somehow make this particular content, okay, the height of this content, to take all the available space in the viewport. Well, you can say, hey, let's gonna use this the viewport height, all right? It's gonna take all the available height as it is. So as you can see, well, it might works, but because now this is a property that works somewhat well in the browser, but not quite on the mobile browsers. This is why we use now SVS, small view height as it is. Again, this doesn't solve a particular issue, which is, hey, what if I want to now only make that fit this particular content, not anything else, not anything else. So this is why, because the height now is looking at his children, and the children is now here is because by default the height is looking at the children, and to compute that here, it needs to receive this data somewhere. This is why on the HTML, if you want to actually pass down the property as it is as the height, as 100, right? Which actually say, hey, I do want to take is only this particular viewport, and then you pass that to the body, say, hey, the height will be is now 100%, all right? Which you might guess that this might be quite the same. This is how you can actually now fix this particular problem with this height inheritance. Again, this goes beyond of today's video, but in any case, the other is the margins, a margin collapse, another topic here from this particular course. So this margin collapse is made of several rules, and you can think of margin collapse when you now cross the boundary of somebody else, right? So the rules here that be quite long and quite tedious, is a well-defined set of rules, all right, that I don't want to dive too much into that. But this margin collapse is something that only works in vertical margins, right? So for example, like this, only works in vertical margin. Let me actually remove this. and put this as it is, as a block. Okay, so I do want to take all the available space for that. Only word for only word for is vertical image. Okay, you can also is transform and say, hey, writing mode, and put it that as the TV red to light, top to bottom. Exactly, you can put it like this way. All right, so and if you put now this writing mode like as it is, top to bottom, all right, or top to writing top to bottom, and if you remove is the block here for all of these elements, all right. So the question will be is that how now the margin will collapse here, and that's a great exercise here, because again you must now follow is how the content is going to be present. And in this case the writing mode is say, hey, I'm going to present is a top down as it is, so the vertical margin is now from the size here. So in other words, if you now say margin inline in both directions, I can say is 20 pixels. Let's say 20 pixels for the bottom, all right, for these elements. So this margin is now the gap between elements. You're gonna add that as it is in the margin inline. Exactly, in my case must be here, margin inline, margin block. There you got it, right? So the margin will now if you want to know that this margin will collapse, well, you can say something like this. Say, hey, margin block, all right, which is the way of is perpendicular to how the content is read. Here I do want to now add 10 pixels, right? But as you can see here, right, only the bigger margin wins here. And not only that, so not only that, that the height of this element here is 18.5, all right, or in this case is the height is this 68.44, and the same is this is the width 18.5 and 18.5, right? The bigger margin wins in this case, right? And also yeah, the bigger margin wins. So for example, is this margin here is greater than that, right? Now it's going to not only wins that, but also is push the other elements into that direction, right? Again, this particular topic of the margin collapse is something that might go beyond the scope of today's video, but I just want to emphasize that that's something that exists. So what are the rules of the margin collapse, and therefore now be able to finally is create our Huckleberry agency here. And let's get into this. So take a dig, and you can see here. Wow, I have a lot of time to not even touch anything here. Visual formatting model. Yeah, I got a lot of time. Not even touching here. Okay. What this is warp? No, this is Yeah, this is this. Okay, cursor. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. I do think that I have cursor. Yes, I do have. So yeah, cursor is this ID that is powered by AI. It's a clone and repo. Do I need to? No, that won't happen. Mm-mm-mm. Open a project, but in my case, I do want is to diggy cursor tab, go to live. Mm-mm-mm. New update available. Okay. Mm-mm. Installing an MCP server. Mm-hmm. But for now, no. For now, no, I don't. There you got it. Okay. And here we are. Okay. So let me is now. Do this. Okay. Okay, no, I do get it. Um, I'm gonna call this as it is. Mm-hmm. And here we're gonna do is this. This is make clear CSS for JavaScript def. Diggy diggy. And just gonna clone this. There you got it. And this is it. Let me install here the dependencies. in Node. Oh, because I do need to get in here, exactly. Okay, install this here. Okay. Huckleberry. Okay. And here we're gonna see it, exactly. And there you got it. Git clone here. Okay. Good. Very, very, very good. Huckleberry agency website. Okay. And now let's do this. I do have an old version of Node. This will work. npm, this is Huckleberry, and npm install. With an old version of npm. So supplement metadata must be fetched for the registry. And this is an all log file. And then run the star server here. npm run star. And here we are. This is it. Good. It's gonna make these things here. I do one is to now show is here. There you go. So what I want to do here now is to match the design as it is from this, right? From here. Okay. All right. So the point here is that in any design we can start is from the outer, from the box model, and then from nuances here, right? The color and stuff like that. So I do think that this is going to align to what CSS is. So let's get into this. So because here in this code we have now is this particular code that is look like here. No, this is not. It's here. And let me open that up here with cursor. Okay, it opened a new tab here. npm star. There you got it. And here is our HTML, right? So our HTML is made of Madwix wrapper. So it has now this particular wrappers here. We also look at the convenient way of using this particular max width wrapper, because here we can now specify is what will be the max width of this particular content here. So, but in any case, we can start is here with the header, all right, and then on the main. So we can say something like this on the header or on the main. Or start just with the math with wrapper. So this math with wrapper, because at the end of the day, each one of those elements into the DOMs are a box. So if we start from here, we're going to now is provide this content as we expected. So in any case, we say, hey, this one, right? It'll be now max width of 300 pixels, all right. And the other is, so I want to now align this content as it is, because this is now a div and a section, so both of them are block elements, so they're going to take all the available space on the horizontally, but I do want to now center this into the middle. So I can say, hey, margin will be is 0 from top to down and auto horizontally, right? And if you just only apply that style here, there you got it, right? Now content is quite center, right? So the content is quite center. All right. The question is that what we want? To match this? All right. Or instead, we just only so this will actually behave in small windows. It's gonna show as expected, right? Similar for a small window here, it's gonna be shown as expected. As we can see also here. But we do want is to now is add some padding here, right? Add some padding as it is. So what we can say is, hey, I would like to now add some padding here. So padding here will be on the in all dimensions. It'll be now 60 pixels, right? So now when we shrink here, we already have is this padding around the content. That match somewhat is this, right? So far so good. Okay, so far so good here with our content as it is. Okay, now, but because the content here is something that doesn't actually quite fit this. Okay, let's going to start is with the intro chunk instead. So with this intro chunk, which now is part of the first content, okay, now things are gonna behave in this way. And this is what we might want to apply to this, right? So hey, this intro chunks is actually now is behaving the way as expected. So that's great, because I don't want to worry right now is on things like colors and so on and so forth. I do want is to focus is on a lot of the spacing here. Also handling is that content. So let's get into this. This might be something like, because I don't have access to that. I do have access is with this. There you got it. All right. Much better. Way much better. So, okay. So now the content here. Why I cannot take that? Oh, there you got it. So here now is on this particular content is pretty much now 64. The same for that is 64, 94, 96. So we can now is add that particular padding to this and then say something like this. And say, hey, the padding will be now is yeah, the padding will be now is at the top. Exactly. So the padding will be now at the top is 296, and then at the bottom 64. All right. We can now is say, hey, the padding of the corner will be something like 20 pixels or 24 pixels. From top to bottom. Okay, from top to bottom it will be 96 pixel, 24 for the left and right, and from the bottom it'll be now is 64. Right. So just by applying that, and when we reload it, we already have now that particular space being applied, right? As it is. So great. Cool. Now, then is now the content that has is, well, a margin of 48 pixels here, and a 16 pixel amount is to paragraph. So this is what we can do. We can target is that particular element. Okay. But what do you think you're doing? All right. And then you have the H1 here, where it say, hey, the margin on the margin bottom will be is now this one, right? Is 48 pixels. Is 48 pixels, right? So this is it, and the next is the paragraph, right? Where you say, hey, the paragraph here will be now is amount elements will be now is 16. So you say, hey, margin bottom here of 16 pixels, but I do not want to apply to the latest elements that, right? So this is why we're now here and say, hey, last we can say last child or last of type. I would prefer to go with last of type. Last the nth last of type. All right. And here you say, hey, margin bottom will be now is 0. There you go. So, well, here's a change. So the margin here is, as you can see, is this one, right? We add this margin of 48 pixels, and the padding between them is now 16, because now margins here collapse, so the bigger one wins. Great. But I do not want to apply this margin here, you know? I don't want to add this. So what I want to do here is to say is this, right? And last of type. You can say last of type, right? And if I say last of type, this shouldn't be applied. Okay, good. Last of type, and there you go. Now it apply as expected. Okay, so this is how you select pseudo classes here based on a state. So now this actually works as expected. So actually it's looking good. It's looking good, right? It's looking good. Perhaps not the center mode as it is. Okay. But it's now being aligned to the center, which might be something that we want for now. Okay. And here is now changing the dimension to say 24, and then to say now 24 as it is, right? So because now these particular elements here, let's also is get rid of the margin here, because we don't want to actually is apply that particular margin. Okay, not perhaps right now, but what do we want to apply is now under the max width wrapper. So max width wrapper here, let's say, hey, the margin from top to down will be 0, and from outer will be all the available space in the left and in the right. Okay, and if you apply this, max width wrapper, max width wrapper, here we can apply that into this, and then now this actually doesn't look like suspected, but for the sake of the example, let's going to put it now in this way, right? Let's gonna center this as it is. So we now So far, I have handled is the boxes here from this side. Let's go to the next one, right? To also handle the boxes. And in this case, following is this, right? So here, because now we have is the car that is gonna handle that. So it's inside of the car that we do want to handle now is this particular size, right? So the text from each one of them here is now something like 39, it says. So for the sake of the example here, so we have now a box that is wrapping this content with a padding of 16 in both sides, and this different is based on the this different is based on the browser, despite that it's now being rendered as it is 16. You know, and it's actually telling you that this element, the padding is here 16, and that's quite interesting. Okay. So the padding here is now in inline direction is 32, and in both directions is 60 and 50. That's what we're gonna do here. So here on the indented heading, okay, we can now apply this indented heading of this element. So first thing first, let's going to try to now align this content as it is. So the way to do that is by now taking the car here, and if we do want to align the car, we can say, hey, this will be now the first thing first is remember as a sequence, and that is, well, the next section is the main. So let's gonna provide now is the main color here. And the main color here is this. It is possible to get now the HSL because it is much more intuitive. Background color to this. Thing is starting to look much more adequate. We're going to later on see why we're gonna leave that as it is, because we don't able to take all the available space. At least this layout doesn't help us here to take all the available space as it is, as is in other layout here. Okay. But at least, well, it's gonna take this, it's gonna work as it is. So we're going to also apply now is the elements here, which is the inline directions here. It says now this is 72 and 66 of the content here. So let's get into this. So the content here of this Why not? Okay. So now the max width wrapper in this case will be is 312. So if we use now this max width wrapper that say, hey, the mean width will be is 320 pixels, right? And if we take a look at that, the mean width will be now that, all right? And now the margin in this case, if this is now 0 and take all the available space in auto here, max width, oh, it's because exactly, it's because the max width is this. So now it say, hey, the math width will be this, all right? But as you can see, this actually doesn't align to. So by now adding is this particular padding of 24 pixels. So now, not only that our content will likely to look like as it is, but it's going to shift also is with that. So instead of actually now adding that content here, okay, which is something that we do need to add, so instead of adding that padding is into that, we can use now this, all right, as a way to align that content as it is. So in other words, we say is that the max width of this content will be this, so it's actually pointing that out here. We are somehow is applying is too much padding to all dimensions, like 64, which is of course based on that. But it's based on this. No, I do get, okay. Okay, top, exactly. Top, right, bottom, and there you got it. Makes sense. Well, you can say, hey, this max wrap here, okay, I do want is to now center that margin.auto on horizontal and top and down and horizontally. So now it actually looks like as it is, right? So because now in here we add now is some padding to this car element, okay, which is 72 and 66, right? Let's get into this. There's also no like symmetry with that, and this car with another one, 96 and 64, 62 and 66. No, there's not. So let's now make the car here, the margin of the top of 72 and 62, 72 pixels on the bottom, on the top, and 64, 66, 66 on the bottom, right? So now our car will look like this, but we're adding now content is into this. So we're adding is margin to this. So if you do want us to now add is gap between your content, this is what padding's for. Like this. This is what padding's for, to adding gap between your content. Okay. And there you go. So now this car, the max width is quite different. So the max width of this car is okay. So for example, like this. All right. And here on the but the problem is that if you now for some reason change this and say the car here will be 80/20 pixels, all right, and then you try to align that too, right, it won't be aligned properly, okay, because the dimensions now has changed. So what we can do here is to wrap them, all of them, into the same chunk, or into the same max width wrapper. Into the same max width wrapper. Into the same math width wrapper here. But in this case, the max width wrapper will be is based on the bigger one, which is as it is, right? But in here, we can now fix is this. To actually match is the layout here. Exactly. So what we do here is just to use now a max width wrapper for both of these content, and it's this content that we're going to now set what is the max width, and then playing with another inside of this max width to do so. So now that our layout kind of look like what we want, okay, it is time for us to now provide is the content for the car here. And let's get into this. So this car will be now is the background color white, right? Which is this. This doesn't look too nice. All right. Interesting. But because we are adding is now padding to this, uh, we would like is instead of doing that is adding to the max width wrapper, right? So now for consistency, okay, we do have now is this, right? So for consistency, what we did is just to say, hey, this particular wrapper here that we want us to now align all of our content will have is this particular rules of the padding and the margin. So we're going to align this. This is the max width that we want to set up. And then inside of those elements, we can now is actually is play with the style, play with the width as it is. Okay. So, um, so that was good. That was actually pretty good. In order to understand now when you want to define this particular layout here, you use now a max width wrapper to do so, and then you now work with the elements inside of this it is width and how you want to look like. Okay. So following in this another design here, welcome from operations. Here we do want is to now is add some pixel here on top of this by saying, hey, the padding at the top, padding inline, padding block star, padding block star will be now of 5 pixels, right? As it is. Just for convention, so padding top as 8 pixels. All right. So now, do we add this at the top of our car? Okay. This is the dimension that we want for our headings here. Is it 16 and 32? So what we do want is to here is wrap this and say is with the indented heading here, this particular block with this indented heading here, we do want is to now add the particular padding to this, and that is padding in all directions. As it is. So in this case, what I do want to apply is the padding for this content, okay, inside of this car. And let's get into this. We're just adding that padding star. And yep, there you got it. So you can say just simple like this, top and bottom, right? And the padding of the dimensions, and the padding from the right and left here we are using now is we're using now is padding inline in the dimension is 24, inline is 24 pixels, right? All right, so here we're starting to adding now this particular padding, diggy, and also we can now is padding inline in both dimensions. But here is using now is 1.25 root element, okay. Or just simple 24 as it is. And then on the bottom as well. Exactly. And then off the bottom here. And then off the bottom here, which is padding or padding horizontally, padding right, or padding left, right, padding right and padding left, and then on the padding bottom, just padding bottom, the same. All right, so now our car is starting to look like way much more like the design, right? All right, so now, well, let's take a look at the this element here. This intended heading. So this intended heading is firstly going to let me apply is the background color here, which is this one, right? So I copy this background color here, diggy, and then apply is the particular style for the padding, 32 and 16 as it is. So padding I can apply is this. Um, uh, 62 and 32, right? So here we can just apply now is this root element and two root element, okay, in the intended rem. So we have right now here, okay. We're applying some sort of margin here, but I don't want to apply margin. At least here, I don't want to apply any margin here. Come on. All right. But because here now is taking all the available space, we don't want to do that. In fact, we want to now the width take only the content of that, which is good. And then what I want to do is to now shift is this particular box to the left by saying margin right minus 32 pixels. Margin left 32 pixels. And here we are having now this nice little layout here that when we apply now a shadow, okay, by saying is now box shadow here, and say, hey, I want to now make this like 2 pixels, 2 pixel width, exactly. I do want to just add that on the bottom or the inline, 0 on the next one, and part of the same color here. But in this case, I want this to modify is the lightness here. Another thing I can do is, well, put it that way and modify it is lightness as is. The lightness, the saturation here. It's not that way, and in fact it must be from here. And there you got it, right? It's quite awesome. It's 8 pixels. Okay, it is 8 pixels. So now this is starting to look quite neat as our content here, right? And also we can add is the color to that. It doesn't give us the color here. Interesting. It doesn't give. There you got it. This is how you can get the color here. The structure is being already done, so we can say it's just only by passing is a strong tag. When you define a strong tag, the color will be is this, right? And this is it. And this is it. But remember that the alignment here is not the same as it is. So in order to fit that, what we can do is to now move the car, move that box into that, right? So by moving now is the car to margin margin left of minus 24 pixels, right? We are now have to move our content to that negative margin, but I think it's margin this is our car, but it's not being applied. Margin left, for some reason it's not being applied, but I do want is to move is the car in itself to actually match that. But if I move the car here, it wouldn't make that So what I can do is or move the car, which is my instinct telling me is that, hey, now you can move is the car, all right? Or you can move is the max width wrapper here. So if I look at the particularly workshop solution here, when instead of moving the car,
which is 24 pixels with 120%. And I think that's actually almost, I think we have to do by 16 is equal to 1.25 are reused. With that done, and for the H1, I'm going to set
and it's actually
the margin bottom to be 3 rem. Once again, 48 divided by 16 is one side of. If I look at the styles for this, I notice that the paragraph has 16 pixels that I have this percent, and that'll make sure that it shrinks down to the size of the content. And for the first problem, I'm going to give it a negative margin left. So like, for example, if I make it minus of top and bottom, lots of different places, and in the other places, I might want the standard 24 pixels of padding all around. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to my indented heading, and I'm going to set margin top minus 16 pixels. And the way I calculate that is that there's 24 pixels of padding. I want there to be 8 left over at the end, so I have to subtract something, right? Like 24 minus what is equal to 8, and the answer is 16. Now in terms of the bottom margin, I saw that I wanted 16 pixels, but actually I'm going to make it 1 rem instead. And when I look at this, it looks right. It's
Which is kind of why I'm not apply that, because I didn't apply any here margin to that.
Looking pretty darn good actually, but you might very well be wondering, why would I use pixels for the top margin and rems for the bottom? Well, it all comes down to readability, right? The difference between pixels and rems is that if the user goes into their browser settings, into the appearance tab, and if they change their font size, any pixel value will stay the same. So we still have 8 pixels of space over here. I still have 32 pixels of space over here. But anytime I use rems, like these 16 pixels that I had over here, that value is going to expand with the user's font size. And the bottom space is functional in this case. Like I have a heading and a paragraph below, and I think I do want that space to expand with the larger font size, just like I want the space between paragraphs to expand so that it's clear that they're separate paragraphs. That's always the mental model I recommend using, is should this value, this spacing thing, this padding thing, whatever it is, should it expand with the user's font size or not? If so, you should use something like rems or ems, and if not, you should use pixels. So looking at this now, we're definitely almost there. I think the last little detail that we need is that the card has a bottom border. So I'll quickly add that now.
So yeah, but in my case,
padding
it's like
on the main tag. Like I don't want the text to be right up against the edge of the view pixels on either side. Actually, yeah, the way to check that is to see what the padding looks like if the text is so tightly constrained. And as we just saw, there is 24 pixels of padding on this card. So on my card, I will add padding 24 pixels, and I'll do it on all four sides. Like
this is quite interesting because as the revelation here of when do we use pixels or when do we use now rems, if do I care about the user font size, so if this spacing must be aligned to the user font size, then I use rem. If not, then I use pixels.
Even though clearly there's more space on the top, or maybe even less space, but there is one thing that is so easy to miss, but so important to make something that really feels professional. We've lost our clean line over here where all the text neatly corresponds to a single line. Instead, now the text is lining up with our card, which I suppose isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's not the effect that we're going after in this case. I want all the text to line up nicely. To fix that, I'm going to have to inset the card by the same amount of its padding. And so I'm going to say the margin should be 0 on top and bottom, but negative 24 pixels left and right. By doing that, I add 20.
Exactly, but it's because now I add this card here to do so. But I add is to the margin. So, and again, if I remove this, or for some reason, I just say is margin left, margin right to minus 24 pixels. That of course will align the content, or should align the content here, but it doesn't. But it doesn't. Which is the car. And it say, hey, the margin right is because it's the margin left. That's right, the margin left here is now aligned to the particular content as expected. All right. So this is now how we'll apply all of these particular styles to this. But as we keep writing the notes, it's you're giving a decent start in terms of the HTML markup, but not much in the ways of a style. You will be expected to edit style CSS to implement this style, and you can also edit index HTML if you wish. Though it should be possible to solve this project touching only style.css. Don't worry too much about best practices. Later in this course, you will see how to create scalable encapsulated styles, and for now the goal is simply to implement the design in the screenshot. With whatever organization strategy comes most naturally to you. You may be tempted to read it for CSS strategy we haven't seen yet in this course, like flexboard and absolute positioning, but please try and complete this workshop without them. This model is focused on flow layout and the box model, and it is possible to lay everything out of the page using only padding, border, and margin. It is important to be comfortable with this primitive before moving on to more complex subject. Future workshop will provide a React starter for early workshops The focus is on the fundamentals, so we're using pure HTML and CSS. And if you feel more comfortable using JavaScript framework like React, you can go ahead. But don't use any component library or CSS. All CSS should be written by hand. Pay close attention to the alignment, which is what we did here. I have made this image semi-transparent to highlight the alignment. See Figma for a color accurate reference. That said, don't worry if you can't create a pixel perfect recreation. In the solution video, I'll show you exactly how I did it. Spend an hour or so on this project and submit whatever you have at that point. Then you talk about this stuff called design tokens. In the early days of the web, site will be built largely on feel. Color and size will be chosen based on the whims of the moment. This led to some very inconsistent looking websites. Nowadays, it is common to have a set of design tokens. A design token is a value that can be reused. Typically, it is part of a collection or a scale. We'll learn more about this idea later, but for now, you can copy and paste the value from this list as needed. But now, it is common to have a set of design tokens. Don't worry about being dry or using variables. Plop these values in where you need them. If you find it difficult to use this token, or if you are able to not achieve a result you're happy with, don't worry about it. Solve it however you can, and then watch the solution video to see how I did it. You have all of this particular token. This app uses an X pixel unit. All spaces are multiple of 8 pixels. When it comes to math width and minimum width of the card, arbitrary values can be used. And then you have now fonts. One font is used in this project, Lato. It's already included in the style sheet. Font size, the rem unit should be used. And the scale is 1 rem, 1.25, 1.5, and 2 rem. By default, 1 rem is equivalent to 16 pixels. And then you have the color palette. Primary, secondary, and grays. I also want to now add a this last thing here on this element here, which is adding now to the card this border margin. This border margin here. Exactly, this border margin, which is adding to the card here to say border top of 8 pixels or a box shadow of 8 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the edge, and the color here. And doing so, oh, we add that to, okay, we add that to the car. But I do want to add now for the pixel. Now here, I do want to add that is to the main here. But at the top. Which is on the header. That's where I can add that, right? I can add that on the header. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but it's because this adding is to that dimension, but I don't want to add this here. I want to add that is on the top. So box shadow. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. Inline shadow. Inline shadow. You can say. Um, box. Inline shadow. Oh no! I know where I can apply this. Okay. Because this is a box shadow that I can apply is to the main of this box here, but I say, hey, -1. And then it's going to apply that. Okay. But this was quite interesting in terms of understanding what we have to do as it is. Hmm. And also right below the car here. And on the car, we say, hey, box shadow, which will be is the top and right. In this case, I do want to have it to the top, not on the right and left, and this will be the color here. Okay. Box shadow. Okay, that's counterintuitive of anyway. Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay. This is the way how the things work. It work backwards. Okay. But yeah, this is it. Hmm. But how we use now, I think that the core point of this is that using now particularly wrapper that is going to use a box wrapper that is say, hey, this will be the max width of this content, and then internally you can now play with the dimensions and the position in there. All right, and with the margin and padding, and how you are going to apply that padding and margin, because now here we are using is the font size of 32 pixels. All right, so H1 will have now a font size of 32 pixels. All right, a font size of 32 pixels. And here we'll have now a 24, right? And here the H2 will have now a font size of 24 pixels, right? So for example, like this. All right, we're not working with weight right now. Ain't none of that. And also is a line height. So the line height is now 1.2, and the same for line height. This is now part of the standards. This is now part of the standards of what will be is the line height of the content here.
Pixels of using is should smaller viewport sizes, and I think things are scaling pretty darn well. And I think it's worth taking a moment to celebrate the progress that you've made so far. Whether or not you were able to come up with a solution on your own, we've covered a lot of ground already.
Oh,
and
look
it's
at this.
kind of remarkable
Well,
how much we can do
I do need to
with
add
only
some
flow layout, right? We
here.
haven't talked about positioned layout or flexbox or grid. And so even though our journey is, and I think things are scaling.
Okay. So what we can do here is that because the content is collapsing here, on the max width, I do want to add that padding here. Not at the car, but at the max width wrapper. So now they are aligned to that. Okay, so you say this one, padding top, padding block, and inline. Right? Exactly. So here we're going to say, hey, now the padding here, it'll be top and down that. All right. And padding right of 24 pixels. Padding left of 24 pixels. We're adding padding to this content, which is the car, but the car is okay. Okay, but the car is now here. Exactly, but this time now the padding is here, which is what do we want to. This is what we want to do. All right. But in this case, what I want to do is to apply this particular padding to this and there, and not start with this. So in other words, is our indented heading is somehow now adding padding to this. So this content now is aligned to, but without the padding. So in other words, we need is to remove is this. But Look at this. The content in here is indicating is this. But the problem is that is with this math with wrapper. Right? So because it is with this max wrapper that we are adding here to the padding on the left side, right? It turns out that it will be wise to add that, but as a margin. But if you add this as margin, all right, but if you add that now here of this wrapper, right? If you add now this wrapper here, okay, we will need to somehow is adding the padding is on each one of those elements. So in other words, it's adding the padding here as well. And padding left. But the content is no longer aligned, because now not only in this box needs to be aligned, but it's also in this another box needs to be aligned, needs to follow that pattern. So in other words, it also must be on the intro chunk here, you know. And I don't think this is I mean, this might work
pretty darn well. So I'll quickly add that now. On the card class, I'll give it a border bottom of 8 pixels solid, and I'll
So this might works here because you're adding padding to all of the dimension here. All right, by saying padding to all of the dimension, but in this case you are saying is padding to all of the dimension to this car. So you're adding this padding to these elements to all of this car, as well as the inner box here. So what we're doing is here with this wrapper is just to use that as a way to center that content into the middle. All right, as a way to use that to center the content into the middle.
use the same color we used before with a lightness value of 60%. And look at that. It is kind of remarkable to think,
again,
we started from this purely unstyled HTML document. And in the course of about 20 minutes, we've added all the styles for this
for
landing
this
page. You can
layout
also
to
take a look at how it
center
works
your
with
elements
smaller
here.
viewport sizes.
That's exactly what we're doing here.
And I think things are
And
scaling
then you can
pretty darn
define
well.
more
And I think it's
inner
worth taking a
boxes
moment
here
to celebrate the progress
modify
that
the
you've made so
dimension
far.
of
Whether
it.
or not you were able to come up with a solution on your own, we've covered a lot of ground already. And it's kind of remarkable how much we can do with only flow layout, right? We haven't talked about positioned layout or flexbox or grid. And so
Okay.
even though our journey is just beginning, right? This is the end of the first module with a workshop. There's so much more to go, and I'm so excited that you're here on this journey. I hope you're
hell.
feeling excited too and seeing now
That'll be all for this video.
just
Take
how
care.
much we can do
Bye-bye.
with the tools that we've had and how much more we'll be able